June 19th, 2007. My name is Shawn Ingraham, and I'll be conducting this oral history interview.
With Joseph R. Horanzy.
Okay. And then do you just want to tell us your rank and then what position you had in the military?
I served in the 15th Air Force in World War II. Flew 35 sorties over Europe. In my service time, I served 9 months before I joined the Air Force. I was in the 75th Division of the infantry. At that time, I was the youngest division in the Air Force, not in the Air Force, in the infantry. And then after serving there, I transferred to the Air Corps. It was the Air Corps at that time. And I served, we served there. We flew missions, combat missions. I flew in B-24s. My training consisted of being in Las Vegas gunnery school. This was in Las Vegas, Nevada. Then we had what they called final phase training in Topeka, Kansas. That's where we got our plane that we were going to take overseas. This was also a way of getting the airplane to the combat area from Topeka, Kansas. From Topeka, Kansas, we flew to Newfoundland, where just as a stop. And after that, I don't remember exactly how the routing was, but we ended up going to somewhere in the Mediterranean area. From there, we went to near a town near Naples, Italy. It was called Cerignola, Cerignola. By this time, we already had our crews. We were assigned our crews in our final phase of training. And we did some final phase training, mission, flying with the people who we were going to go into the battle, combat. We landed in southern Italy, Cerignola, and a couple days later, we moved to our airfield in Foggia, Foggia. And 2 days later, I was on my first mission. We went over to, Tom has a better knowledge of it than I do. I think it was Munich. And, we had heard of this. This was getting near the end of World War II. The Germans were taking pretty much of a beating, a lot of bombing going on. And so we went to, then I was there, and we would fly. I don't think we ever flew more than 2 missions in a week, but we would fly every second day, every 2 days or 3 days. This pattern continued until my 24th mission. That's when we were shot down. We went to the target was Linz, Austria. We got shot down. Our plane was crippled. We got hit in gas tanks. We were losing our engines on the left-hand side of the plane because of fuel. I remember I was sitting in the ball turret, and when you get in the slipstream of the plane, my jacket was soaked with 100-octane gasoline. I was sitting like this. You didn't want any sparks or anything. In a ball turret, you're very tight. I probably shouldn't have been in in the Voltaire. At that time, I was around 5'11", and I did that because I wanted to be in line with my friend, who was a little shorter than I was. So I went with him, but I was thin enough and I was agile, so I had no trouble. It was tight sitting in the Voltaire. Of course, the temperature, we're in high altitudes, and most of our missions were somewhere in the 40,000 feet in the air, 40,000 feet in the air, and the temperature gets way below freezing. So we had to wear, you had the typical fur boots that you see, and there were inserts, electric inserts. Now, I couldn't fit in there, so I had the inserts. I was able to do that because you used your feet to manipulate your gunnery sights. There would be reticles that you would zero in on the tips of the enemy planes if they would come in, and this would tell you whether they were in range or not. So it was hard, to manipulate this. But I started telling you about the gasoline that was coming out. We had to leave the formation because we knew we weren't going to stand. We were losing so much. So we left the formation, and at that time, they had emergency landing fields off the coast of Yugoslavia. And we were trying to go as far as we could to get to that place. And I remember that it was very comforting. I think it was, they had the 99th Fighter Squadron. This was the Black Squadron, and I remember how when we separated from the main group, we were now all alone and subject to, attack by the Luftwaffe. But we picked up an escort, a fighter from a P-51 from they were trying our protection. So he accompanied us until he got us out of enemy territory. And from this point, you could feel the motors starting to leave. And I still remember stories from gunners who had come back and always telling us that if you hear them ring that bailout bell, don't wait, because it could make all the difference in the world. And the only reason I wasn't the first one out of the plane when I heard that bell was because my radio operator, Reichert, was there before me, but he bailed out. It was a very, very eerie feeling. You're in this plane with the motors, the engines going. Then when you bail out, it's a strange sensation. You pull the cord, it opens, and you think for a minute you're dead. Everything turns so quiet, And I was close enough to a couple of the gunners on my crew that we were able to hold a conversation going down in the parachutes. And we came down, we landed. I remember when we were landing, I kind of had to push myself away because there were some rocks, big boulders, I should say. We pushed them away. Of course, we didn't know where we were or what was. We knew we were in Yugoslavia. And there were standing instructions at that time. Should you ever be shot down or you have to bail out, look for the partisans. The partisans were they called them, they were the underground for Allies. They say, look for them. He says they may have all kinds of uniforms, different uniforms, because they were, they were just volunteer, people who would fight the enemy. And he said, but the one way of recognizing them, they would have the Red Star. I guess this was their association came from with the Russians. And so we got out. My tail gunner landed next to us, and I remember him. He liked to smoke. He was dying for a cigarette. And I said, no, to get the smoke, we would let him smoke. So we moved along. we had to find out where we were. And here we found a very, very peaceful scene. There was a mother and her daughter in a field. They were sorting potatoes. They were gathering potatoes. And so we went to them. And as we spoke, I could recognize some of the words that she was saying. See, I'm Polish. I spoke Polish. And there's a similarity with what they said. And I remember asking her for water. And that's how I knew, you know, said, voda. They went over, and they were wonderful. We stayed with them. Now the problem was the Germans knew that we were there, or the Ustashi knew that we were there. And so they wanted to get us out of that immediate area. So they turned us over to these, the partisans. And we ended up, a couple of the other gunners on our crew were there. They came over, and you know, it was so, here these people in the middle of a battle zone, they had nothing, but they invited us into their home. There were two of us, and we were joined by our radio operator, Richard Riker joined us. So there was Valley, myself, and him. We sat. They had a torn tablecloth. They set it out for us. They were very humble, beautiful people. They gave us soup, you know. And then while we were there, as I just said, they knew we were in the area, so they had to get us into a safer place. Now, when we were able to gather about the order in which we landed. First of all, our plane, after we bailed out and came down in the parachute, we could see our airplane just head off to the horizon. Then when it lost its other engines, it hung over on one side. It scared me. I said, gee, if it turns around and comes this way. But it didn't. It crashed somewhere in the mountains. Well, anyway, while we were eating there, it was dark. Some partisans. I remember one short guy. He was strong like a bull. He was, oh my God, big handlebar. He picked up they took us in. By this time, we met some of the other gunners. A strange thing that happened on this mission, when the pilots, when they fly missions, they change off sometime. Now, two of the people on our crew were replacements because for one reason or another, the bombardier and the co-pilot couldn't go on with us. So they took the replacements and they were hurt. It was Butler and the other guy was Hayes. Not him. They had the option of coming with us. But because one of them, I think it was Butler, was hurt. See, but the two of them, this was the very first mission for Butler. Hayes, it was his second mission. But they opted to stay with the partisans. So the partisans take us, they're going to take us deeper into Yugoslavia, you know, further away from the pockets where the pro-Nazi, the Ustashi, they used to call them, where they were there. So we left them behind, and we went on. We did a lot of walking in Yugoslavia as we were trying to go deeper in. And I remember funny things. We would be sleeping in a dirt-covered farmer's home. There's this chicken going around, and making a noise. They take a box, throw it over the chicken to keep it quiet. We stayed there, and we had to keep on moving, so we didn't stay there long. And we were walking, I think it was at the Dalmatian Alps. We walked through. Then we finally came to the town was Gospic, Gospic. Spelling, I think, is close, but may not be the right. And we stayed there, and we were interned there for, over 5. My total time of being in Yugoslavia, it was 6 or 7 weeks. But what was happening, by this time, there were people in a similar situation that we were. They were shot down, bailed out. We began to tax the people, the peasants that were taking care of us. So they had to make a move to get us out. By this time, there must have been around 80 or 90 flyers there. I remember sometime we'd meet wherever they would feed us. They would, I guess, pool their food. And I remember at that time they had fighter pilots from the 99th Fighter Group, and we ate there. Then finally, a smaller British warship was in the Adriatic, and they came to the coast, and they took all the flyers that were in my situation. They put them on this boat, and I still remember the bread that the British naval people gave us. After that, we returned back to our flight base, and let's see now. I didn't fly any missions for a couple of weeks. But then after that, I still had to finish my tour of duty, which consisted of 35 sorties. Each mission was a sortie. I don't know how they defined a sortie, technically. But I had to finish. I had 11 more missions to go. So how I got my 11 missions in, whenever somebody found out that they were going to a hot target or something, they would get sick. I finished my 11 missions this way. And we went to a couple of hot targets. Vienna was one of the hot targets. As the target area grew smaller, what made it worse, they also moved the anti-aircraft guns into a more concentrated situation where they would fire the attacking bombers. And we were there. I still remember flying some real hot missions, like Vienna was a hot target at that time. And I can't tell you just what the targets were. There were industrial targets. Let's see now. All right, when the British put us on, we got back to I finished my tour of duty, and then I was discharged, came back to the United States. Thank God. Now, let me see if I can think of any of the things the mission that I was shot down on. Am I repeating myself? Did I say this earlier, Tom? No, because I repeat myself. Well, one of the things on this hot mission, it was the one that it was the tough one that we went to. We went down, that's the one they lost a lot of the planes on. We would go, I was sitting in the arrangements in the ball turret. The ball turret is stowed up in an up position. It had hooks that held it, in position. I guess the pilots didn't like to fly with the ball turret in a down position. because of the drag and the slipstream and whatever the air factors are. Well, I was in the turret, and the Germans came out of their own flak, and it hit us, because ordinarily, when you open the bomb bay doors, our fighter cover would pull away. Just thinking, why should the fighters go through the black? They're not delivering any bombs. But when the Germans saw the bomb bays open, they hit the bombers in their own flak. And I was in a ball turret, and the ball turret was in the up position. And the procedure is supposed to be the waist gunners would jack you up a couple of notches so you would release you from the hooks. And we were hit by a lot of fighters that time. I don't know how many, but the waist gunners were busy shooting at the fighters. So I'm sitting here in my turret, and I couldn't get into it. By the time they got me down, the attack was over. Everything happens fast when you're the past, and it was over. I saw the planes attacking our plane. I don't know whether I got off a couple of rounds or not, but I was not involved in too much of it because my turret was rendered ineffective. It was in a stowed position. But that was the mission that was the toughest mission we ever went. I don't know how many planes we lost at that time. I could see parachutes going through the air. I witnessed planes blowing up off on our right wings. You would see them, and you could just see the plane would disintegrate. You'd see a couple of parachutes, flyers would try to bail out. But that was the worst mission I ever was on. You could see planes to the left of us, to the right of us. We took a beating. That's the one you had it on your list of the time. I forget, but that was the roughest. Most of the missions, you would fly. You'd have a formation, a bomb group in a front. Then you'd have probably what was the main thrust, and then you follow it up. So you'd see the planes in the front and in the back, and sometimes they wouldn't hit you if you were. It all depends on where the fighters would come. What was scary was one of the prime targets was Ploesti. This was a major source of oil toward the end of the war for the Luftwaffe. And what was psychologically, it was very, very tough, because as you would come into Hungarian planes, you would come in and you could see the flak. And you're sitting there, and every minute you're getting closer and closer. You've got to go through it. So you could see it, and I think I had three or four missions to Ploesti. As I said, that was one of the top targets of the war. Then they had some, what they called milk runs. Nothing happened. We didn't get fighters all the time. Thank God. But the flak, the Ploesti. Let's see, I'm trying to think of things that might be of interest. After that, I finished my missions. I came back to to Foggia, finished up, and was shipped back to the United States. Now, are there any kind of questions? Do you have any questions or anything?
Yeah. Why don't we start with how did you get involved in the military? When did you get recruited, and how did you get recruited?
I was drafted. For 1943, when I turned 18. I was in infantry for 9 months, but I always liked airplanes. I wanted to fly, but I didn't make the grade for going to pilot training. That plus the fact that the war was getting closer to the end, and the demand for the fighter pilots was beginning to diminish a little, I would guess. I didn't make it. And so what you do is the washouts would go into gunnery training. And in gunnery training, we went to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. From there, we went to Las Vegas. We had gunnery training for around 3 months. And I remember, Tucson was a beautiful place. The place was good there, and that's where we did our final phase training. And after we were ready, they shipped us out. We got a nice shiny airplane in Topeka, Kansas, and we flew it to the war theater, to where we were, to Foggia. I guess that was a good way of getting transport troops over there and transporting the airplanes there. That's how I ended up there.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked? When Pearl Harbor was attacked?
I was the assistant manager of the Embassy Theater in New Britain at that time. I was, 16 or 17 at that time. 17, I guess. Yeah.
Were you in high school at the time? Or?
Yeah. No, I graduated in 40, see, this is the thing that fails me. I graduated high school. There was a theater in New Britain. I was an usher, then I was assistant manager in the theater, and my buddy and I decided to enlist. And he went in. We wanted to go together. He went into the Marines, and I ended up in the Air Corps.
What were some of your feelings when you're on your way to Europe?
It's kind of mixed feelings. You feel, someone your age looks for the adventure kind of thing. Flying, you see the things, and you see the kind of glory of things that war sometimes portrays. You don't know how quickly that disappears when you start feeling shrapnel hit your airplane. But that's, you felt good, then you felt scared. And you knew in advance if there was a light target, like I mentioned, a milk run. But you also knew that if you were going to go to Linz, Vienna, Ploeste, Regensburg, these were hot targets. They're manufacturing targets. There were more, the concentration of fighter pilots. Those were the scary ones. And as I said before, as the war moved on, there was a greater concentration because of the borders that the Germans had to protect shrunk. So, but the guns were concentrated. There was heavy concentrations. But again, the Germans were starting, the Luftwaffe was beginning to show signs that they were being defeated. So.
Did you want to get drafted?
We enlisted. At that time, to control the people going to the various branches, they took away what we would complete volunteer. You go up and say, I want to go in here. You would go into a pool, and then they would decide whether you would go into the Air Force, Navy, and that's how I happened to get into the Air Force. So it's kind of like a draft, but I had to enlist to take part in that, so they would call me sooner.
You said earlier that you flew no more than 2 missions a week. Is that correct?
Maybe it would be. You wouldn't find day after day. Now, very rarely would you consecutively. You might go two, skip a day. As I said, I flew 35 sorties. So, and we were there. I don't know how many months we were overseas, but that's hard to tell that way because part of it was we were on leave. You know, so you can't go by 35 missions over so many months because this doesn't work out. Of course, I spent 6 weeks in Yugoslavia.
What did you do in your downtime then, or your free time, when you weren't fighting or flying missions?
When we were, well, there's a nice field in back of where our tents were, and then we played touch football. Foggia, you were safe. You were back in the lines, and there would be fighter personnel. A very strange thing. Somewhere along the line here, recently I read that the camaraderie. My impression was that it was being discouraged, so that you wouldn't feel too close. Now, proof of this in my own experience is I can't tell you who the guys in the tent next to me were. I know a couple of them. There was a fellow, his name was Sperry. I remember him because he came to visit me when I was in Connecticut. But you wouldn't build a close association with the people. Of course, if they got shot down, they weren't around. Your crew, you were pretty much together with. You lived in the same tent, and you had nice. It was comfortable. You'd have the mess if you wanted to eat. None of the guys didn't want to get up to go for breakfast. I didn't. But the food was good, and they would have movies. They would show there was an old barn converted into they put a small projector. We'd see that, and then you'd have the radios. There was a Catholic church in the city. We'd go to church if you wanted to walk. And there were fields. I remember walking around in the fields, just looking at it. Yugoslavia is a beautiful country. And I still, I don't like reading about ill feelings between the people there because they were all good to us. Very good, very warm people. They had nothing, like I said, the chickens running around on the floor.
Did you get any opportunities to go into the towns and?
There were the town. There were not where we were, not where we were. There was probably the center where they had the church. I don't think they could call it a town. There was nothing. The people were in the field. They were all spread out, and it was hard to define what would be a town. I did not, except when we came back. When we came back from the British boat, and we came back, we would go to Italy, the towns that were Naples, Foggia. We went there. This was after my combat days. I did get to go to Rome, visit. We saw the Pope. But it was. Quiet times.
Did you see any USO shows or anything like that when you were there?
Yeah. But I saw that when we were over. When I was still in the infantry. They had the USO show would come through, and they had dancers and the music. Yeah, but when overseas, I'm trying to think if there was any time that we had any. USO. I can't recall that we did.
Do you remember any practical jokes or anything that happened in particular between you and the other soldiers when you're at the camp?
I gotta think a minute. I'm sure there were. We had fun and all. I just can't come up with a specific instance. After you leave, I probably will. Well, there were times that it was pleasant. I can't come up with it.
Okay. Could you tell me a little bit about the airplane itself, like how many people were in the crew?
Oh yeah, I can do that. I still remember the thrill when we picked up our airplane in Topeka, Kansas. This beautiful airplane. And that was a big plane at that time. The plane had 10 people flying. The pilot and the co-pilot, are they listed there? Yeah. Oh, this is a better picture. You want me to hold that up for you?
Yeah, sure.
On an angle?
Sure.
Okay.
Right. So you can go ahead. So who were they now?
I'll tell you this. From left to right, that was the upper turret gunner. You want his name?
Sure.
John Horanzy. Well, you have that on this picture.
Okay.
Okay. Then the next to him was Richard Reichert. Now he's the one that I had communications with for, a few months after. I don't even know if he's alive now, but I did communicate with him in writing. The next one is Valley. He was Ovid, we used to call him. That was his middle name. And I remember him. He smoked. And when we came down, when we landed, he was dying for a cigarette, and I wouldn't let him smoke because I didn't want any smoke trail. The other guy was our crew engineer, to maintain the. He didn't do much with the motors, but made like primary inspection before a mission. He just died. Maybe a month or so ago? Excuse me. The other one is Dale Van Gundy. He was our nose gunner, and then that's me. On the bottom row, these were the officers. That's Roy Kuhlman. He was when we were shot down. I didn't go through this. The order, the way we landed. Excuse me. He landed just outside the German camp, and he was taken prisoner of war. This other guy is Brock. He was the navigator. A very, very precise person. I always felt secure with him because when he would substitute, fly, and they had another navigator, he would say, they're off a couple of miles or something. He was very precise. He was a brilliant man. Then the next guy is Lieutenant, he was Roberts, he was our pilot. He did not fly. Some of the higher ranking officers would fly less frequently. And then the other one, Gustafson, was a bombardier. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know whether he was on that mission. No, he wasn't on. That's when we had the two substitutes. No, so he wasn't on. But the ones here, Roy, the first one on your left and the second one, they were taken prisoner of war, along with Wiley Hawkins. He's the one with the baseball hat next to the guy with the curl lock on his forehead. The age-wise, I was the youngest one on the crew, and I was 19-something when I was shot down. And that was, I think that's the plane that we flew over to take it over to overseas. The name of our airplane, we were Crew 52, and our plane was the Shady Lady. That was the name of our, you know how you see pictures of the planes, they paint on them. So we were the Shady Lady. We didn't always fly the same plane though. You know, I suppose whatever it was, but most of the missions were in that plane.
Do you know what became of the soldiers that were POWs?
I beg your pardon?
The soldiers that were captured. Do you know what became of them?
Brock is back because I've had communication from him. Coleman, I've had letters from him. The pilot Roberts, no, I never heard anything from him. I don't know what happened to Gustafson. I don't know. And then as far as the gunners, I heard from Hawkins. I heard recently from his children telling me that he had passed away. Valley, the tail gunner, he was. I never heard from him, but I know some of the other gunners did. Reichert I heard, and Havancic and Van Gundy. Did not hear from them at all. Let's see what else you were saying about. I say Valley was in a tail. This is when we were getting ready to bail out. And when you open on the 24 in the waist, there's this big hole in the plane. And he was in a tail. And he was crawling out of it. He didn't want to go in there. He didn't want to cross that thing because there was this hole. So I remember I helped put the hatch down so he could come in. It was easier to bail out. But he wanted to come out of the tail, kind of lonely in the tail all by yourself, and of course the other members are in the waist of the gun. Yeah, but he's the one that when we were in the chutes, I was talking to him. Yeah.
What were your feelings when you got back to the United States?
You're very grateful, you know. You sit there, and especially after some of the experiences and you hear about what happened, and the casualty rate in the Air Force, and so you're very happy.
What did you do when you got back?
I went to, as a matter of fact, the term was just starting at Central. I think I was discharged sometime in September, so I enrolled in at Central.
Okay. What did you do after you graduated then?
After I did what?
After you graduated?
I got a job in Torrington, teaching the 4th grade. I was there for 2 years. Then I transferred to Berlin, and I was in Berlin for, let's see, how many years have I been there? 32 years, 30 years. And I was 4th grade teacher. I taught 2 years in Torrington, then I came and I was in Berlin. I taught in a building, I guess it's a historic building now. Old building, creaky stairs. I was there. Then they opened up a new school. It's still there. As a matter of fact, my grandchildren go there. Or they did. Willard School, Tom?
Mm-hmm.
I was there for a couple of years. Then they opened up a new school, and I had completed my certification requirements. So I was appointed teaching principal at the old Worthington School. That's the old building. I was teaching principal for 1 year, I think 1 or 2 years. They opened up the new school, and I was appointed to supervising principal. I was there until they opened up the Griswold School. The Griswold School is in Kensington here, and I was there until I retired. I had 32 years in Berlin, I think, 32, and I retired. Now Joey teaches where? He teaches in a school that I was principal of. I transferred from the Willard School, no, the Worthington, that's the old building, wooden building. Today they'd never, it's a fire trap. And then I was at the Willard School, which still stands. And then it was the Griswold School. My son teaches in the Griswold School to this day. Also he teaches 3rd grade, I think. You know.
What was life like before the war, like growing up?
Okay, well, I worked in a theater. You know, I think it was pretty. We played baseball. We'd go to the YMCA. Played most of the time. We'd be playing baseball in the fields. You know, you go out on a playground. You get so many kids, and you play the particular games. I had no formal experiences. When I was at Central, I played mostly because there was a shortage of men. I played basketball. I played one. I played one game, I think, with the varsity, and then I played junior varsity. And after that, I had much more success on a varsity baseball game. I played with them. I played outfield with them. And then most of that with the Theater Association and the working, you know, I got the job. My daughter married Tom. Yeah.
Did you have any siblings?
Yeah.
Have any siblings?
Yes. I had 2 brothers, and I had 3 sisters. I think at this point, all of them are dead. I'm the only living one, yeah.
Did any of them fight in World War II?
My brother, one of them, served in the Army, but he had no overseas service. He did, yeah.
What did your parents do growing up?
Try to scrape a living up. No, they came over from the old country, and my father worked in the factory, Landers. My mother, she was home. She was a housewife. She worked in the factory too. In the old Stanley Works, they had a lot of the people who came over from Europe would work there. She worked there. Then when they had the family, she was just rearing the kids.
So that was from Poland that they came from?
Yeah, they came from Poland.
Okay.
They came from Poland to Pennsylvania to New Britain.
Okay. Let's go back to the war. What feelings did you have when you found out FDR had died?
About what?
When Roosevelt died.
I was sad. I was an admirer of him. He was, we felt, I liked him. I felt sad. I don't know what else I could say. But, you know, it was, there were mixed feelings because, you know, the war was over and everyone was looking forward to the peace that.
Okay. Are there any other stories that you'd like to tell?
No, it's hard because, you know if you can specifically keeping the things, as I said before, I find that in my waning years, my memory, some things I remember very, very clearly. Others, don't ask me what I did this morning, you know, and somewhere in between, you lose a lot of your experiences.
Okay. And thank you very much for this interview.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Make me feel like some kind of celebrity. Medals that I had, I was the recipient of a Bronze Star with the 3 oak leaf clusters. For each cluster represents 5 combat missions. Then, of course, the usual good conduct ribbon. And these were authorized. I don't know how to get this stuff here and work into this thing. You don't need this. No, you don't need that. Oh, yeah. Well, this one. Okay, the good conduct medal. You get that after being in the service three months. Yeah. And as I said before, the gunners. This was pretty much a general term. The gunner's rank would be usually a staff sergeant. Sometimes the more technical gunners would get tech sergeant, like our engineer Hawkins. I think he was a technical sergeant. You know, the one that has the 2 rockers, and I think he was a technical sergeant. See, these things it's hard. Sorry, I can't recall.
That's okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Something that I, up to this point, have never availed myself to was a caterpillar pin. This was something that you would work on your lapel. It's a lapel pin. It indicates that your life was saved by bailing out of a plane, and the parachute was responsible for saving you. Now, I never got the medal, but my son-in-law is in the process of trying to get that for me. I have the tab from the parachute to prove that I had the parachute if their records go back that far. But I'm going to try to get a caterpillar. It's a little lapel pin. It looks in the shape of a caterpillar. I suppose it's supposed to indicate you crawled out somewhere. So I'm in the process of trying to get that. Tom will let you know if I ever get it.
Okay.
Okay? Good thing you're going to have to glue this together. When we were in the hands of the partisans, and I mentioned that our bombardier and navigator stayed behind. Well, the only other time we heard was, turn it off. We found the bodies of Hayes and Butler. They were killed by the partisans who fell upon them, where we were a day before. We were resting there before we went on, and it also proves how important it was for us to keep on moving deeper into Yugoslavia.
Now, I thought the partisans were the underground Yugoslavian group.
Say that again?
Were the partisans the underground Yugoslavian group?
Yeah.
Didn't the Ustashi kill
No,
him?
Ustashi were the bad guys. Ustashi were the the Communist Party. They were, well, at that time, communists were a friend to you, but the Ustashi were. It was a funny relationship with them. They were the Ustashi were. See now, here's where my confusion.
No, you said the partisans killed those two guys.
Oh yeah.
I thought the partisans.
No. The partisans did not kill them. It was this other political group, the Ustashi. It was not. No. The partisans were our friends. No, I told her the little guy picked this, built like a bull, big handle. I remember him too because I had my gun, my .45. I gave it to him. After that I was sorry because we still had a long way to go. But you wanted to give them, to give them, they were our allies. You wanted to give them whatever guns.
So it was the Ustashi that shot those two men?
Yeah,
Okay.
not the partisans. Partisans are good guys.
Okay.
During that time, So, okay, it's a good thing you're here. You have this. We put out her best tablecloth, tattered tablecloth. It was like some kind of needlework, and they put the soup out on it for us. It was good. I'm very grateful to the not Ustashi, partisans, the communists, the Yugoslavians. Today they have different factions in there. There's Serbs, this, and we had a mailman here who worked, and I guess he was not too kind about. The ones I thought were good, but in that time in history they were. But he grew up in there, and I guess politically things might have changed. I don't know. I don't know just how and if.
So you never heard from the partisans again after you moved on?
I wouldn't even know where to go. No. The people that were the partisans was Marshal Tito's group, and he was a great hero. He was the one that organized the people. So Marshal Tito, and of course the Yugoslavian people loved him, post World War II. At least I think they did,
Okay.
Although I didn't fly on D-Day, we flew the day before when they were softening up the installation, the shoreline and whatever. So I flew a mission on the day before D-Day. I flew southern France, so I flew on that.
Where did you take off from then?
Our home base in Foggia. Yeah. See, when you look at the map, you start looking toward the heel of Italy. So this is near the heel, and that's not far from where where D-Day took place. But there was we really didn't. We just softened up the shore, dropping bombs. I'm not aware of whether there was any kind of fighter, that tried to fight. So we were there the day after D-Day.
The day after D-Day?
Yeah, day after D-Day. See, the D-Day, we did not fly D-Day. We flew the next day because they flew for I don't know how many times, but they had what I think was a continuous bombardment. I don't know how many days it lasted, but we did not go the first D-Day. We were not D-Day plus one.
Were you flying with more planes that day than you were used to?
I think so. I'm not. You feel that there was more activity in the air. But by this thing already, I think the German forces were anticipating this, so they were gearing for that. And towards the end of the war, the time here, there were the Allied forces had such supremacy, so they had pretty much free reign over the skies. Yeah.
You were a gunner, so did you ever have to discharge your gun at any enemy aircraft?
A couple times, that mission I told you where we were hit, and I was up in a turret. I think I did get a couple of shots off, but this, I was there, so I couldn't shoot it because the turret is up in the body of the plane. The guns are sticking out like this, and the radio operator and the engineer, they're supposed to, the operating procedure is they jack you up and then they let you down. The thing goes down, and now you're in control. You can move up and down and all. You can control the guns, but that's what I couldn't do.
You talked a little bit about it before, but could you tell me a little bit more about how the gun actually worked and how you controlled the gun?
These were 50 caliber machine guns. There were 2 of them, and they fired. Did I say 50 caliber ammunition? They had flexible chutes that you would put, on the outside of the turret, and we had to make sure to load these every mission. And you had your controls on the top. You could go from side to side, and your sight was controlled by your feet. I think I went through this. They had the reticles that when they touched if you were firing at a plane, you knew the plane was in range. If the reticles, they were within these reticles. One was up like this. I don't know just how it was, but you controlled this. You could go up and down from side to side. But, and then they had the other territory. Everyone. Do you remember the fellow that was? He did a TV commercial. He had very, very heavy eyebrows. An old timer on CBS. Ask him what that. No, but he said he made the claim. Now don't put me down for this because I don't know how valid it is, but he made some claim to the people who flew in a ball turret. He said they were the bravest guys in the world. He said he wouldn't go in that thing for anything because you're sitting.
Was it Andy Rooney in 60 Minutes?
Yeah, that's the guy. Yeah, Rooney. I don't know what access it had, but he's the one that made that quote. Played a real tribute to the ball turret gunners. He had one of his, he had like 5 minutes at the end of his broadcast, but I heard him say this. And for people who don't, it's scary the first time you get in. There's nothing below you. The vision of the ball turret dropping.
So was it all like glass then? Or?
Metal. It was metal, and then they had a peck of it, in a set. Isn't there? Where's the picture? Isn't there a picture of the ball turret?
No.
No. It's just a rounded turret, and they had a circle, maybe 15-inch, 12-inch, I don't know, this is where you would see through. And the guns were mounted on the outside. You had 2 guns. She says a long time ago. Gee, I did a lot of interesting things.
Now you talked about the boots, but what else did you have to wear while in the ball turret?
Oh, this was funny. You asked for something funny? I don't know how you're going to say this, but when we bailed out, I was telling you that it was tight. So I don't know what I did. I didn't have my fighting suit. I don't know whether I left it or something. Then they had a very shiny green suit underneath. And it had this was your heated suit, the wires in it all, and it had no fly. It had no fly. It had no, it had no fly. So for all the time until I got some other clothes somewhere, I don't know where I got them from. Here I had to walk around and I had to, come make sure I wasn't. No, I wouldn't have exposed myself, but it was a funny looking suit, shiny suit, a real sheen to it. And I don't know, I didn't have it long, but I remember when I was walking around and her being, you're out there and it was like you weren't, but you didn't have a complete uniform on.
What did you wear on your head?
You had a helmet. You had your your hearing, and then you had your throat for your voice. There was an intercom on the plane where you could, tail gunner to pilot, all right, and you identify your position and then speak.
How well did the plane fly?
How
well? Yeah.
How well?
Yeah, like did the pilots have any troubles controlling it or anything like that?
I forget what the reputation. As far as we were in, the flights were pretty smooth. I know I mentioned to you that the ball turret would create a drag. I don't know what the pilots would, how they would handle, the steering ability of it. I don't know what they would tell you. But it was good. It was a good plane. Sometimes I resent the fact that the B-17s get all the glory. You want to get this. But in actuality, I read that of course B-24s were made in the Ford plant, Willow Run, that actually there were more B-24s than B-17s. True, the 17s may have been there at the beginning of the war, where they didn't have fighter coverage and a lot of the other advantages. But I understand that there were more B-24s than there were 17s. B-17s may have dropped more bombs, tonnage, but as far as casualties, there would be more casualties in they were there longer, the 17s. We trained in 17s too, incidentally. It was, at that time, that was the first plane. They had the brunt of all the fighters, the German fighters.
Could you talk about, now that we have the camera on, could you talk about that piece of bark again?
About what?
That piece of bark?
Yeah.
Could you talk about that now that we have the camera on?
Well, I recorded all of my missions on a piece of bark that I stripped off a birch tree when we were going overseas. We landed at Gander, Newfoundland, and from there we went on, proceeded to our base in Italy. But somewhere here, I have if I can find it, I have all my missions. Every time I would write it down in ink, and so I had a listing of them on a piece of birch. I fancied it up and tried to draw an emblem of the 15th Air Force.